Hello, everyone. Just wait for a few people to tune in. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So hi, everyone, and welcome to an Advaya live stream with Dr. Rupert Sheldrake. My name is Christabel Reed, and I'm one of the founders of Advaya, a global platform for transformative education that explores ways of being that cultivate connection and purpose, address systemic change, and inspire people to create thriving cultures. I'm really excited to be joined by Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, who is a biologist and author of more than 90 scientific papers, 9 books, and is co-author of 6 other books too. He's best known for his hypotheses of morphic resonance, his criticism of the materialist worldview that dominates conventional science, and his research in the memory of nature, the power of the mind, consciousness, and telepathy. For the next 30 minutes, we will be discussing the dogmas within conventional science, how science validates and improves spiritual practices, and the new online course that starts next week, The Big Questions in Science, how to understand them and set yourself free from dogmas. Please put any questions you have in the comment section of Facebook Live or YouTube Live, and I'll do my best to share them with Rupert till the end. And if you'd like to learn about the upcoming course, please visit www.thebigquestionsinscience.com. As always, Advaya is committed to offering bursaries and concessions to anyone who needs, so finance should never prevent you from joining any of our courses. There's also the 15% discount code, Science Set Free 15, all lowercase. And yeah, I hope you can join us. But for now, here is our live Q&A with Rupert. Welcome, Rupert.
Good to be with you, Christabel.
Hello.
Hello.
So, Rupert, you've been dubbed the most controversial scientist on Earth. This is a bold and unusual claim, especially for a scientist that is as popular as you are, as widely published and as well known. Your brilliant TED Talk was banned, which I found very shocking and surprising. Your book was given to us at school in philosophy to read. And yeah, I was just very shocked by this statement. And I'd love to hear from you what your views are on this. Why do you think your research has been so controversial? Why are your conclusions, or at least questions, threatening a particular worldview?
Well, the sciences have been dominated since the late 19th century by the materialist worldview, which is the belief system that the whole of the universe is made of unconscious matter. Everything is machine-like, including us. We're lumbering robots, in Richard Dawkins' phrase. Our brains are computers. Consciousness doesn't exist in the whole universe, and the fact it exists in our brains is a kind of anomaly and has to be explained away as an illusion. It doesn't actually do anything, according to materialists. There is no free will. Consciousness has no function. It doesn't, improbably enough, this is what they actually think. Psychic phenomena are illusory. When you die, it all goes blank. Memories are stored in the brain. This worldview has become very dogmatic. It's become, for some people, a kind of religious faith. It's sometimes called scientism, turning science into a kind of religion. And that kind of science, materialist science, is firmly established in some people's minds as the only true way of doing science. So when I suggest alternatives, because I think science needs to move on from the dogmatic materialism to a much broader view of the world, when I suggest alternatives and critique the materialist worldview, it upsets a lot of committed materialists. On the other hand, a lot of scientists like it because they actually feel the present worldview is very constrictive. But the materialists sort of dominate the airwaves, and so they just hate what I'm doing, which is why what I'm doing is so controversial.
Thank you so much. The book by Richard Dawkins was the book we were told to read before we were, thank goodness, offered your book. And the thought of humans as lumbering robots was such a contrast to the way that I'd been experiencing my life for those 16 years until we were reading your book. So it was a huge relief to my soul and my mind when we were given your book, and we could then engage in these more articulate, intelligent conversations rather than just based on feeling, which I can often find gets me in a bit of a trap when having these sorts of conversations with materialists. I'd love to ask, is it in Set Free, which is the US title, and the UK title is the Science Delusion. In that brilliant book, you talk about the way that these assumptions have over the years hardened into dogmas. And you explain that they're not only limiting, but they're also dangerous for the future of humanity. So it'd be great to hear kind of how, in what way scientism might be dangerous for us, causing harm, perhaps, linking ecological and mental health crises as well with that particular worldview.
Well, mechanistic materialism, the dominant orthodoxy, is intrinsically reductionist. And it tries to explain everything from the bottom up in terms of parts. So biology should be explained in terms of molecules from that point of view, because they're the smallest things in life. But this leads to a very distorted view of nature and misses the big picture. And one of the big pictures it misses is the fact that our life on Earth is totally dependent on the entire planet and on everything else on Earth. And a kind of science that focuses on fixing problems or developing new technologies, all with a kind of tunnel vision, just looking at molecular details, has led to the ecological crisis. Scientists now, fortunately, are doing something about it, but we sleepwalked into this because it was just assumed that science equals progress and progress is a good thing. And I think this narrow, limited view has harmed our relationship with the planet. It's led to the extinction of countless other species. It's threatening our own civilization and survival. And not only that, it leads to a very false idea of ourselves. It leads to the idea that we're just machines, our brains are just computers, our minds are inside our heads, and that we live in a universe with no purpose. Well, this is a very, very depressing point of view. And I think it's no surprise that in modern secular societies, depression is the endemic mental disorder. There are hundreds of millions of people in the world on antidepressant drugs. And I think when we educate people into this worldview, which is still the dominant worldview taught in most schools, we're setting them up for a depressing view of nature, one where they feel alienated, detached, and separated from the natural world, instead of interconnected, interrelated, which I think is much closer to the truth. We're part of the natural world. The Earth is like an organism, the solar system is like an organism, and our life is totally interdependent on other people and other forms of life, and indeed the entire planet and the entire solar system, the galaxy, and ultimately the whole universe. And I think this message is much more healthy, much more true, and makes us feel much more connected to what's happening rather than disconnected and alienated.
Thank you so much for so articulately sharing that, because when my sister Ruby and I set up Advaya, we did so with this feeling that the ecological crisis and the mental health crisis are both very interconnected, and perhaps stemming from or rooted in the same particular worldview that sees ourselves as separate, which causes us to into a sort of power over paradigm, into domination, oppression, extractive systems, rather than seeing ourselves as having an integral but interconnected existence within a whole kind of, like you say, living organism. And I know from my personal experience in my life, when I forget that I live in an animate world of kind of wonder and magic and interconnection, and the subtlety of things as well, I can fall into being, having lower moods, feeling more anxious, feeling more stressed, feeling more overwhelmed, and just mentally having that perspective shift, which I can also access through spiritual practices, but also just the intellectual shift in point of view. Everything kind of changes and is released. And I just think it's so integral that it's not that anyone needs to believe one way or the other way, but to at least create space for these conversations to be had, for inquiry to happen, because it feels very much like there's a constriction there. And there's a stereotype as well that if one speaks about kind of this, the power of spiritual practices, that you're kind of looked down upon as being a bit new agey or not serious, or not having a kind of good grip on reality. And actually, your work has shown that that's not necessarily the truth at all. And I'd love to ask you a little bit more about some of the assumptions that lie at the root of the materialist worldview that in your book you work through, and also in the course starting next week that each chapter will address. What are some of the kind of fundamental assumptions of the materialist worldview that actually don't hold up to scrutiny?
Well, first and foremost is the idea that all reality is material. There's no consciousness beyond or within the universe. There's not even supposed to be any inside our own brains. And that's why the very existence of human consciousness is called the hard problem for materialist science. We ought not to be conscious, and some philosophers try and argue that we're not. They argue that consciousness is an illusion. The trouble is, they don't get rid of consciousness that way, because illusion is itself a mode of consciousness. So that's one of the problems. Another is the assumption the world's like a machine. The universe is like a machine. Animals are like machines. So the science is all about mechanisms, how machines work. Well, some aspects of living organisms are a bit like machines. Our heart is a bit like a pump. Our eyes are a bit like a camera, and so on. But a much more appropriate metaphor for living organisms is simply that they're organisms. I mean, it's not even a metaphor, it's simply a statement of the fact. And I think it makes more sense to think of the whole evolving universe as like a gigantic evolving organism, developing organism, than like a machine. The Big Bang, the expansion, the growth of the universe, the formation of all the galaxies and planets within it and life on Earth. This is nothing like any machine we know about. I just think the machine is an inappropriate metaphor. It's only a metaphor. It's not even a theory you can test. Then the idea that nature is purposeless is an assumption that follows from the machine metaphor. Machines have no purposes of their own. Then there are the assumptions that the total amount of matter and energy is always the same. Well, in the last 30 years, physicists have invented about 20 times more matter and energy than anyone knew existed before. They call them dark matter and dark energy, but no one has a clue what they are. They may not actually exist, and yet physics now has 95% of reality is supposed to be in the form of these unknown forms of matter and energy. Well, that raises far more questions than it solves. And then there's the idea of the laws of nature are fixed. They were all fixed at the moment of the Big Bang and have never changed since. Well, there's no evidence for that. It's simply an assumption, a carryover from 17th century theology, which got built into science. And I think the laws of nature are much more like habits that evolve along with nature. The idea of the mind's nothing but the brain, again, is an assumption that's very, very limiting and forces all our mental life to be inside our heads. And I think it's spread out beyond the head in every act of perception. My image of you now, Christabel, on the screen of my computer is not inside my head. It's where the image seems to be on my computer screen. And I suggest all our perception involves an extension of the mind into the environment around us, which is why phenomena like the sense of being stared at happen. If you look at someone from behind and they don't know you're there, your mind, in a sense, reaches out and touches them, which they can sometimes feel. And then because of the mind being in the brain theory, materialists are violently opposed to psychic phenomena like telepathy. They say they can't possibly exist. They're physically impossible, according to the laws of physics. And they think they're so sure about their dogmatic belief system that they think it's unnecessary to look at the evidence for these phenomena. Then there's the belief that memories are stored in the brain. This is part of materialism. Memories, if they exist, which obviously they do, must be material by definition, so they must be somewhere in the brain as material traces. It turns out that it's not how they work at all. It's much more likely that our brains tune into memories, a bit like TV receivers, than store them like video recorders. The transfer of memory depends on the process I call morphic resonance, which also leads to a tremendous radical reinterpretation of biological inheritance. The genes play a part, but they're grossly overrated, and the recognition within science of the missing heritability problem says that genes in most situations account for only about 10 to 15% of what's inherited. The rest must depend on other things, including epigenetics, but also, I think, on morphic resonance. And all of this then, when it feeds into medicine, leads to the idea that mechanistic medicine, treating bodies physically and chemically by surgery and drugs, is the only kind that really works. And this rules out all forms of alternative medicine. Just by definition, they're dismissed as quackery. I think this extremely narrow view of medicine greatly inhibits the power of our medical systems. It dominates official medicine and official medical research. And I think if people lightened up a bit and recognized that traditional medical systems, including Indian and Chinese traditional medical systems, have a great deal to offer and need to be integrated with this mechanistic medicine, I think we'd have a better and cheaper medical system. So these are some of the dogmas which I think are actually holding science back, and which, when we move beyond them, would open up whole new potential areas for research, which would make it more fun and probably a lot cheaper as well.
Wow, thank you so much, Rupert. I'd love to hear a bit more about kind of, your vision. You know, if we imagine that over the next few years, there's an accepting from the materialist worldview of the fact that these foundations, these dogmas, are actually assumptions, and that science does end up opening up. What do you think the world would look like? Or we could make it a bit smaller, and at least, like, how would that impact the scientific community if they really were to apply the kind of skeptical spirit of inquiry to these dogmas? What do you think you'd see in research and new directions?
Well, I think we'd see, first of all, the recognition that the universe is a living universe. The universe is like an organism. Galaxies are like large organisms, and maybe they have minds as well. The sun may have a mind, may not just be a hydrogen bomb as usually thought. In fact, I recently wrote a paper published in the Journal of Consciousness Studies called "Is the Sun Conscious?" So I think we'd have the idea we live in a living universe with many kinds of minds, both above and below the human level. We'd recognize that animals have minds, plants have some kind of mind, fungal minds exist in a kind of extended way, that we're not unique in having minds or intelligence or mental activity. This is shared by many, many aspects of nature. And this one could call a panpsychist worldview or an animist worldview. Panpsychism is becoming increasingly fashionable, actually, within philosophy of mind. And it gives us back the sense of living in a living universe, which we're much more connected with than we are in a mechanistic world. Secondly, I think recognizing that matter and energy, there's huge amounts out there which science doesn't or can't explain. It could lead to new energy devices, so-called above unity devices, which at present are ruled out as being impossible. But there's all sorts of inventors with devices that defy the known laws of physics, and therefore they're marginalized and not taken any notice of. I think this could be a huge burgeoning field of research, which could have enormous and obvious economic implications. Producing energy without pollution would obviously be highly desirable. I think that recognizing our minds extend beyond our brains would enable us to feel and recognize that we're much more interconnected than we usually think, that we'd be able to recognize phenomena like telepathy, like dogs picking up when their owners are coming home, or people knowing when a friend or a family member is about to call them. They think of them and then the phone rings and there that person is, what I call telephone telepathy. And that phenomena like this are normal, not paranormal, natural, not supernatural. They're part of the way our minds work and are extended in the world around us. And I think in the realm of medicine, a recognition of the power of mind, the effects of spiritual practices, and the incorporation of more holistic medical systems than our own would have profound implications, providing better healthcare, cheaper healthcare, and could transform here in Britain the National Health Service, making it much more about health than about disease. And the whole system's in crisis at the moment, the current healthcare system, because its spiraling costs will make it all collapse sooner or later. We need all these kinds of changes. And so I'm totally in favor of science. I'm a scientist. I've spent my whole career doing scientific research. I'm not at all anti-science, but I am anti-scientific dogmatism. And I think when we lighten up, when we open up science, when we admit many more areas for possible inquiry, the sciences would become much more interesting. And many scientists who at present are very frustrated by the narrowness and the tunnel vision of science would find their careers more rewarding and more creative. So I think it would be good for science as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rupert. I just hope that we can go more and more in that direction to really open it up. We have a question from Thierry Harris, which I think I can put on the screen, who asks, please elaborate on your notions of collective memory, biological inheritance, and the connection with our ancestors. Can we inherit the pain and suffering from our deceased parents, for example? So that's kind of going into morphic. Yeah.
Yes, well, obviously, this would take a while to answer in detail, but just roughly, we have a collective memory according to my ideas of morphic resonance. All of us tap into a collective human memory, and we all contribute to it. And that's a bit like what Jung called the collective unconscious. We also have a collective memory of our social groups. It's a holistic theory. So we have morphic resonance at the level of cells, level of tissues, organs, whole organisms, and societies of organisms. And a society of organisms, like a flock of birds or a pack of wolves, has its own morphic field, which organizes the individuals within it. Most dramatically so in the case of social insects like termites, where the field of the whole society organizes their mound building behavior, so that the individual termites don't have an architectural plan in their individual minds, and yet together produce these prodigious structures. Now, collective fields also include the social fields, including family fields, and fields of families relate the individuals together in particular ways, sometimes traumatic, sometimes highly dysfunctional. And each of us in our family that we grew up in, our birth family, or if our parents separated and remarried, we had more than one, these families that are our own families are shaped by the fields of ancestral family groups, our parents' birth family and our grandparents' family and so on. And those by morphic resonance affect the field of the family that we're in. And traumas and separations can indeed be inherited through those fields, it seems. This comes out in systemic family constellation therapy. It's something my wife, Jill Peirce, does. And the family fields and working at the level of family fields often has a healing effect on the people within the family, even if they're not at the workshop, not part of the healing process, because the whole field is affected, which affects everyone within it, whether they're present when the healing's going on or not, or whether they know about it or not. I think that morphic resonance can certainly help to understand some of these inherited traumas. Now, I'll go into this more in the course itself, of course, but that is a brief summary of some of the basic points.
Thank you so much, Rupert. I was lucky enough to attend one of your wife Jill Peirce's workshops, and it was incredible. And I love kind of musing about the relationship between family constellation work and morphic resonance and how they kind of fit together, but I kind of get lost in thought in that topic. But thank you so much for sharing that. It was a big question. Have another question, which is about your book, Science and Spirituality, which is a brilliant book, bringing together the often polarized worlds of scientific practice and science. Spiritual practice and science. I'd love for you to kind of share some examples of why you think it's so important for there to be more collaboration between these two oftenly polarized worlds.
Yes, well, this is the book, Science and Spiritual Practices. And in it, I deal with 7 different spiritual practices which have been studied scientifically. Basically, there's been a lot of studies now, thousands, literally thousands of studies in peer-reviewed journals of the effects of religious and spiritual practices. And what these studies show in general is that these practices make people happier, healthier, and live longer. They're good for you. And the 7 I discuss in this book include gratitude, which is fundamental in all religions, but it's something you can do outside a religious context as well, of course. And studies by positive psychologists in academic settings have shown conclusively that people who are more grateful, who call to mind what they're grateful for, and who give thanks for what they're grateful for, are happier, feel more connected than people who take things for granted or feel entitled. They're also more popular. And these experimental studies in universities have shown that if people do simple gratitude exercises, it makes them happier for days afterwards. So here's something which gives us a greater sense of connection. It costs nothing. It's something all of us can do. I do it on a daily basis. At the beginning, when I pray in the evenings, I start by recollecting the things in the day for which I feel grateful. Enormously beneficial and incredibly simple. Then I have a chapter on meditation, and this is probably one of the commonest spiritual practices in the modern world. A great deal of evidence to show that meditation can have positive effects on lowering blood pressure, reducing worry and anxiety, making people less prone to depression, sleeping better, just healthier in general. And that's why millions of people do it. About 18 million people in the United States meditate on a regular basis. So this is something where the studies have shown changes in brain activity during meditation, reduction of the activity of the default mode network, connected brain areas that are active when we're ruminating, worrying, thinking anxiously, and so on. So meditation even affects brain anatomy. And Tibetan monks who've meditated for years, it actually changes the structure of the brain. So meditation and gratitude and these other practices, singing and chanting is another one, all have measurable effects. When people sing and chant together, they literally come into resonance, both through the resonance of the sound, through breathing synchronously. And some studies show that even their heartbeats come more into resonance. And people who sing and chant together usually feel more bonded, happier, more connected. less stressed, their stress hormone levels go down. There are many studies that show this. And my wife Jill also gives workshops on singing and chanting. So I've seen many times how this actually affects groups of people. And of course, singing, chanting, and chanting are part of all religious traditions. So it's not as if this is a new discovery. It's always been known. But we can now see it in a different way in the light of these scientific studies. But again, this is a practice which is enormously beneficial, doesn't cost anything, it's something anyone can do. But I don't think I've got time to go into all 7 practices now, but I hope that's just a small taste of some of them.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you. I'm always really amazed and kind of excited by the fact that within, most kind of world religions or mainstream kind of religions, spiritual practices, within them are very similar practices. And so chanting, singing, meditation, gratitude, all these aspects of spiritual practice you find in most religions around the world, and I think that's incredible, and there's reason for that. We've kind of run out of time, but thank you everyone for your questions. There's one which I want to ask, if that's okay with you, Rupert. It's about morphic resonance.
What about it?
This one is where do you think are the morphic fields located or stored? Could it be within the electromagnetic field of our planet?
Well, in the course itself, I'll explain more about morphic fields and how I think they work. So I can only give a very brief summary. But I think the morphic fields are to do with form, order, and pattern, and structure and organization. So the morphic field of an oak leaf is within and around the oak leaf. It's a bit like the magnetic field of a magnet is within and around the magnet. So the fields organize systems, and they're within and around the systems they organize. So my morphic field's within and around my body. Morphic resonance is the transfer of information from one morphic field to another, or from many morphic fields in the past to one in the present. And that is non-local. It occurs across space and time from the past. And I don't think it's stored anywhere. It's a kind of memory, and memory is a relationship in time, not in space. And as soon as we think of memory as being in space, then we have the question, where is it stored? And of course, we store things physically, materially, in books. We store in, I'm behind me, you see lots and lots of books. They're all storing information. This is a very human way of thinking about it. But writing was only invented, 5,000 years ago? And people started writing things on stone tablets and wax and papyrus and in books and stuff. And more recently, we've had magnetic tapes and compact discs and so forth. We're used to the idea of human-made physical memory stores. But in oral cultures, pre-literate cultures, the memory of the whole culture is mostly oral. It's in the stories, the myths, and the techniques and the skills that are passed on by transmission from generation to generation. So I don't think the memory's stored out there in a sort of cosmic cloud or cosmic CD or cosmic hard drive. I think there's a direct connection between the past and the present through morphic resonance. The past is, as it were, present everywhere and can resonate with anything similar that happens in the present.
Wow, incredible. Thank you, Rupert. Like Rupert just mentioned, if you're interested in anything that's been spoken about today, Rupert dives into these topics in a lot of detail during this 12-part course that starts next week on Thursday. There are 10 chapters which go through the 10 dogmas of scientific materialism, as well as an introduction, a conclusion, and then live Q&As with Rupert as well. So that all starts next week. Rupert, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you everyone for tuning in and for your brilliant questions and comments. It's been really fun to be reading them all. Rupert, you've got lots of wonderful comments about your work. Someone's giving a lecture on you tomorrow in Buenos Aires. Where did that go? I've lost them all now. But yeah, nice to see people's comments about your work, because you for me as well have had one of the most incredible, profound impacts on my life at such a young age, and I just feel really grateful that I was able to read your book after Richard Dawkins in order to give me the encouragement in the direction I was already going. Yeah.
Very good. Well, thanks, Christabel. I love what you and your sister Ruby are doing with Advaya. I think it's just what's needed, and I'm very happy we're working together on this.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. And actually, we've I didn't mention before, Rupert, but our Instagram's been taken down by Instagram for hopefully not for too long, but we weren't sure whether that was related to the kind of topic matter of the course that's coming up. So that's been an interesting experience that I hope we can resolve at some point. But yeah, I just think these conversations are essential, and really excited for the course next week. So our videos will turn off, and for anyone else interested, please visit thebigquestionsinscience.com. You can have bursaries and concessions if you need, or a 15% discount with Science Set Free 15. You can also contact us at advaya.co if you have any particular questions or anything. Ruby and I are happy to support in any way. So thank you, Rupert. Thank you, everyone. And I think the video will play after us.
Hello, I'm Rupert Sheldrake. I'm giving a course called The Big Questions in Science, How to Understand Them and Free Yourself from Dogmas. I deal with the 10 principal dogmas of science, turning them into questions. These dogmas are extremely limiting. They give rise to a worldview that says that the universe is nothing but unconscious matter. The worldview that opens up when we question these dogmas is much more holistic, and I think it's also a much more true picture of nature that we can arrive at. So come along and join the course.